Forget what glossy Hollywood reels want you to believe about armored combat. Most films turn steel giants into indestructible toys, cruising through battlefields without a scratch. Veterans who lived inside those cramped machines know the truth: smoke, sweat, noise, and breakdowns. So, which war films actually got it right? And which ones had veterans laughing out loud at the mistakes? Let's dive into the 12 films that nailed the tanks, and later, 10 that absolutely didn't. Fury 2014. When Fury hit theaters, veterans said it wasn't entertainment. It was déjà vu. David Ayer's gritty World War II drama follows Brad Pitt's Sherman crew crawling through the dying days of the war, and for once, audiences got a real taste of armored combat. What set Fury apart was its obsession with detail. The production didn't rely on digital tricks. They rolled out the last operational Tiger I tank from the Bovington Tank Museum, the only real one left in the world. That authenticity roars off the screen. Inside the Sherman, you don't see Hollywood comfort. You see sweaty, panicked men crammed shoulder to shoulder, shouting over engines that sound like roaring beasts. The loader wrestling shells, the commander screaming orders nobody can hear, the claustrophobic air thick with oil and smoke, it's exactly what tank veterans recall. One even admitted the film gave him flashbacks to Desert Storm. That's not something you hear often. The final showdown, a Sherman trying to outwit a far superior Tiger, gets the balance right. It's not a cartoon slugfest. It's strategy over sheer firepower. Tanks get bogged down in mud, they break, they stall, and Fury doesn't shy away from showing that reality. Even German veterans praised it, which says everything. If both sides of history nod in respect, you know the film nailed the experience. Lebanon, 2009. Imagine spending 2 hours trapped inside a single tank. That's Lebanon, a film so claustrophobic veterans said it felt like being locked inside their own nightmares. Based on director Samuel Maues's real experiences as a gunner during the 1982 Lebanon conflict, the film never leaves the inside of the vehicle. The outside world is only visible through the gunner's scope. It's an artistic gamble that pays off in raw authenticity. Actors weren't sitting on cozy studio chairs. They were jammed into a replica interior for weeks, and you can see the discomfort etched on their faces. Sweat drips, voices strain, tempers snap. Veterans called it the most honest portrayal of life inside a tank because it captures everything other films ignore. The constant heat, the mechanical failures, the confusion of not knowing what's happening beyond those metal walls. One Israeli veteran said the movie was like reliving his nightmares. Another pointed to the scene where the crew deals with basic human needs, under fire, as the most truthful detail ever put on screen. No heroics, no glory, just survival in a suffocating metal box. The sound design drives it home. Engines roaring like a giant trapped animal, turret screeches, and shells slamming against armor with terrifying force. Lebanon doesn't sugarcoat. It strips away myth and shows tanks for what they are: protection and prison rolled into one. The Beast, 1988. The Beast is the tank movie you probably never heard of, but veterans can't stop praising it. Released in 1988, it follows a Soviet T-55 crew lost during the Soviet-Afghan conflict. Forget the Hollywood idea of a flawless war machine. This film shows the T-55 exactly as it was. Powerful, yes, but also prone to breakdowns, heavy maintenance, and frighteningly vulnerable. Director Kevin Reynolds didn't fake it with plastic props. Real T-55 tanks rumble through the desert, and the details hit home for veterans. The clunky manual turret controls, the diesel fumes mixing with sweat and gun oil, the sheer exhaustion of operating such a beast, all nailed perfectly. One Russian tank commander even said, "They got the smell right," which tells you how deep the accuracy goes. The film doesn't romanticize armored dominance either. It shows how Afghan fighters used clever tactics, targeting tracks, engines, and weak spots. The scene where a trap disables the tank made Vietnam-era tank vets nod in grim recognition. What really sticks is the psychological side. Jason Patric's character unravels as the tank becomes both fortress and cage, a safe haven and a prison. Veterans said that mental strain, the paranoia of ambush, the heat, the isolation, is exactly what armored crews faced. Too real, perhaps, which is why the film slipped under mainstream radar. But for those who know tanks, The Beast is unforgettable. Patton, 1970. Patton might be remembered for George C. Scott's Oscar-winning performance, but veterans remember it for the tanks. This 1970 epic took the North Africa campaign and made it one of the most authentic tank showcases of its time. Instead of cheap models, the production sourced M48 Patton tanks modified to look like Shermans. German Panzers were recreated with M47s, painted in Afrika Korps colors. The result? Real machines moving with real weight and believability. What really impressed veterans was the tactics. The film shows how Patton positioned tanks on high ground with the sun behind them to blind German gunners. That's not Hollywood fantasy. That's exactly what the real Patton did. It also doesn't hide how commanders often had to expose themselves in the turret just to direct fire properly. Dangerous, but accurate. One veteran M60 commander pointed out that the movie captured what most films miss. Terrain matters. Tanks don't just charge across open fields like charging bulls. Hills, ridges, and natural cover determine who wins. Patton also showed tanks as part of combined arms, working with infantry and air support instead of acting like solo heroes. Despite being made half a century ago, its realism still beats many modern productions. When veterans watch Patton, they don't roll their eyes. They nod in recognition. T-34, 2018. On the surface, T-34 looks like pure Russian action cinema. Flashy editing, dramatic escapes, and big explosions. But beneath the Hollywood-style thrills lies surprising technical accuracy that stunned veterans. The story follows a captured Soviet crew who break free in a restored T-34. What makes it stand out isn't the plot, it's the machines. The production used real T-34 divided by 85 seconds and Panzer IIs. No cheap mock-ups, no computer tricks. The interiors were built to exact scale, showing just how cramped Soviet tanks were. Even the manual turret crank, which forced gunners to literally spin a wheel by hand, is recreated. A Russian instructor said they even nailed the startup sequence, a tiny detail almost every film botches. What impressed veterans most was balance. The T-34's legendary sloped armor and powerful gun are highlighted, but so are its flaws: poor visibility, lack of early radios, and constant breakdowns. The crew repairing tracks under fire, veterans called it painfully real. The battle choreography also gets praise. German crews try to flank the T-34, knowing its sides are weaker, while the Soviets keep their frontal armor aimed forward. It's tactical chess, not arcade dueling. Despite its glossy action wrapping, T-34 doesn't forget the truth. Tanks were both marvels and nightmares. Veterans walked away saying this flashy film actually taught audiences more about tank warfare than most big-budget Hollywood dramas. That's no small compliment. Kelly's Heroes, 1970. On the surface, Kelly's Heroes is a quirky heist flick, but veterans say its tanks are no joke. Clint Eastwood and crew head off to steal Nazi gold, but along the way, the film delivers some of the most authentic tank action of the era. Why? Because director Brian G. Hutton filmed in Yugoslavia, where the army provided real Sherman tanks and the Dandet, even T-34 seconds modified to look like Tigers. No models, no CGI. These were real steel beasts tearing across the screen. The famous showdown where the Sherman crew faces a Tiger is one veterans constantly cite. You can feel the terror of being outgunned and out-armored. Don Rickles' wisecracking line about what a hero means might get laughs, but Tankers said it perfectly captured the dark humor crews clung to when staring down impossible odds. What impressed vets most wasn't the flash, it was the maintenance. Kelly's Heroes doesn't gloss over thrown tracks or engine problems. Crews are shown fixing their tanks mid-mission, just as real soldiers had to do. The final square-off in the town captures authentic urban tactics, using speed and maneuverability to corner a stronger opponent. One veteran even said he learned more about close-quarters tank combat from that scene than in training. That's high praise for a movie disguised as a caper. White Tiger, 2012. White Tiger is a war movie that feels half ghost story, half history lesson. A burnt Soviet tanker hunts a mysterious German tiger that seems invincible, and the story edges into the supernatural. But here's the twist. Despite the fantasy angle, Russian veterans say the tank combat is dead on. Director Karen Shakhnazarov went all out. Real T-34 seconds, IS 2 seconds, and a custom-built Tiger replica weighing 15 tons thunder across the screen. The engine roars, turret speeds, and even the shell loading process are painstakingly accurate. One Russian instructor said he actually uses clips from this movie to teach recruits about armored tactics. That's how detailed it island. Beyond the machinery, the film nails the psychology. Tankers naming their vehicles, treating them like living beings, even believing in their supernatural protection. That wasn't just a myth. It's something Soviet crews really did. The film portrays ambushes, flanking maneuvers, and desperate battlefield tricks with eerie accuracy. The scene where a T-34 uses a burning building as cover while circling a Tiger left veterans nodding. It's cinematic, but grounded. Yes, White Tiger dips into strange mystical territory, but when veterans are pulling training material from it, you know the technical side is ironclad. Sahara, 1943. Made in the middle of World War II, Sahara is proof that even a propaganda piece can nail authenticity. Humphrey Bogart leads an American crew stranded in the Libyan desert, crawling forward in an M3 Lee. And unlike most wartime films, this one didn't just aim to boost morale, it got the details right. The M3 Lee wasn't glamorous. It had a clunky, side-mounted 75mm gun with limited movement, blind spots galore, and constant overheating. Sahara doesn't hide it. Veterans who fought in North Africa praised the film for showing exactly how crews struggled with sand-clogged tracks, scorching heat, and near-constant dehydration. The sequence where the crew has to ration water is less drama and more reality, according to the men who lived it. Another detail that hits home: tactics. When their disabled tank is dug in as a fixed gun position, that isn't Hollywood improvisation. That's a real maneuver Allied crews used when mobility failed. The final stand, holding high ground against superior numbers, came straight from combat reports. Even though Sahara was made to rally audiences, it ended up being more accurate than many films released decades later. Sometimes the truth makes the best drama. Battle of the Bulge, 1965. Battle of the Bulge gets plenty of criticism from historians, but tank veterans still salute parts of it. Yes, it plays loose with timelines and geography, but when it comes to the technical grind of winter tank warfare, it hits bullseye. The film doesn't show tanks as invincible. It shows them refusing to start in freezing weather, tracks snapping from ice stress, and crews lighting fires under engines just to get them running. Veterans who served in Korea said they did the exact same thing. Those details had them nodding instead of groaning. Sure, the German Tigers were actually Spanish M47 Pattons in disguise, but the way those machines lumbered, slipped, and ground over snowy terrain was spot on. The production nailed the sense of mass and limitation. Tanks sliding on icy roads, visibility dropping to nothing in a snowstorm, tactics changing completely under weather pressure. It's something only those who were there could appreciate. The film also explains strategy with accuracy, like Robert Shaw's German commander stressing the importance of fuel. Forget bullets. Logistics often decided who lived or lost. While history buffs nitpick the story, veterans still point to Battle of the Bulge as one of the few films that captures the brutal, cold reality of tank operations in winter. Saints and Soldiers, The Void, 2014. Big budgets don't guarantee accuracy. Sometimes it's the small films that get it right. Saints and Soldiers. The Void is a modest indie production, but veterans say it nails the day-to-day grind of tank crews better than blockbusters. Set in the final days of World War II, the film puts the spotlight on an American crew driving an M5 Stuart light tank. Not glamorous, not heavily armed, but fast and scrappy. The filmmakers had access to a real working Stuart, and they showed it for what it was: underpowered, undergunned, but reliable. The details resonate. The 37mm gun is shown as nearly useless against German armor, forcing the crew to rely on speed and ambush tactics. Veterans praised the accuracy of the driving style, saying the Stuart felt closer to a sports car than a tank. You see the crew constantly tinkering with stubborn machinery, sleeping around their tank, and dealing with quirks like a sticky turret. These aren't random embellishments. They're the small truths veterans remembered. One standout scene has the crew repairing a thrown track under fire. Veterans said it triggered vivid memories of grease, sweat, and panic. For a film shot on a shoestring budget in Utah, it's shocking how much realism it packed in. Sometimes the films with the least money end up with the most truth. Das Boot, 1981. Yes, it's about submarines, not tanks, but veterans still put it on this list. Why? Because the suffocating tension inside Das Boot feels almost identical to life inside armored steel. When tank crews watched Wolfgang Petersen's German submarine epic, They swore the atmosphere mirrored their own cramped experience. The endless clatter of machinery, the smell of sweat and oil, the constant threat of disaster, it might as well have been a tank rolling into battle. Das Boot lives in the little details. The claustrophobia of living in a metal tube where every move counts, the relentless sounds, the engine's rumble, the ping of sonar, the pounding pressure of depth charges. Tank veterans said the psychological stress shown in this film is the closest thing to what they felt sealed inside their machines. No Hollywood airbrushing here, just men trapped in steel, forced to trust one another completely. One Vietnam-era tanker said the film gave him flashbacks because the crew's paranoia, exhaustion, and gallows humor were a mirror of tank life. Another pointed out that even though it's not about land warfare, the mechanical authenticity is universal. Das Boot taught audiences what it really feels like to live inside rolling, rattling iron. Swap the ocean for mud and smoke, and you've basically got tank warfare. Cross of Iron 1977. Sam Peckinpah was never subtle, and with Cross of Iron, he gave audiences the rawest Eastern Front tank action of its time. Set in the chaos of World War II's Russian front, the film doesn't glamorize tanks. It throws them into mud, smoke, and madness. Veterans praised it because it showed tanks not as invincible giants, but as vulnerable, groaning machines barely holding together. The production used real armor, Soviet T-34 seconds standing in as German panzers, and staged battles in rough, unforgiving terrain. The result? Action that feels dirty, desperate, and frighteningly real. Tanks grinding forward under artillery fire, bogging down in mud, exposed to ambush from infantry. It was all too familiar to veterans who had lived it. What really struck veterans was how the film showed tanks as part of larger chaos. You don't see shiny standalone duels. You see vehicles thrown into sprawling melees, where confusion, exhaustion, and raw survival matter more than polished tactics. Peckinpah's trademark slow motion may look stylish, but beneath the cinematic flair, the film nails the vulnerability of armored combat. Many veterans called Cross of Iron one of the few war films that captured the grit of the Eastern Front without exaggeration. Tanks weren't gods of war here. They were just one piece of a bloody, grinding puzzle. And that, they said, was the truth. So there you have it. The dozen films veterans say actually got the tanks right. From Fury's rattling Shermans to Cross of Iron's mud-caked Panzers, these movies remind us that accuracy isn't about spectacle. It's about respect for the crews who lived it. But don't get too comfortable. For every film that nailed the reality, there are plenty that butchered it so badly veterans couldn't help but laugh. And that's where we're headed next. Battlefield Earth, 2000. If there's a Mount Rushmore of bad war depictions, Battlefield Earth gets its own peak. Veterans who saw this sci-fi disaster couldn't believe how laughably tanks were handled. Instead of weighty steel monsters, they're treated like oversized props, rolling around with the physics of plastic toys. Engines whisper like air conditioners, recoil is non-existent, and tactics are basically drive forward and shoot. The real frustration wasn't just the inaccuracy, it was the disrespect. Tanks are complicated, temperamental machines. They stall, they overheat, they demand constant attention. In this movie, they're shown as indestructible playthings you can park in any situation. One veteran summed it up with a sigh. It's like the director never even saw a real tank, just a toy model. And then there's the absurd handling. Tanks maneuver like sports cars, zipping through landscapes that would bog down real tracks in seconds. Firing sequences feel more like video game cutscenes than reality, with no sense of crew coordination, loading, or even recoil. Veterans laughed, but not in a good way. They said it looked like the filmmakers thought tanks were magic boxes that never break, jam, or misfire. The result? Battlefield Earth doesn't just miss, it falls off the map. For veterans, it became a punchline, an example of how Hollywood can strip every ounce of realism from a machine that defines weight, power, and vulnerability. Wind Talkers, 2002. Wind Talkers tried to honor the Navajo code talkers of World War II, but when tanks rolled in, veterans groaned. Instead of grounding them in the gritty reality of the Pacific, the film painted them as indestructible bulldozers, shrugging off fire and rolling smoothly where they had no business moving. The real battles in the Pacific saw tanks constantly bogged down, overheated, and fighting against terrain as much as the enemy. Wind Talkers shows them gliding through volcanic rock and jungle like parade floats. Veterans who'd served with Shermans in similar environments said the portrayal was laughably wrong. Those tanks broke down all the time, one vet said. Here, they look like they're driving on asphalt. Tactics were off, too. Instead of combined arms with infantry covering tanks, the film often isolates the machines, turning them into superhero props. There's no claustrophobia, no sense of the brutal coordination needed inside. Crews appear to fire without loading cycles, commanders bark orders that magically happen, and the tanks seem immune to mechanical failures. The irony? Windtalkers wanted to highlight unsung heroes, but its careless treatment of the machines surrounding them made veterans roll their eyes. The story deserved better. Instead, it turned tanks into hollow props. Another example of how Hollywood oversimplifies steel giants for spectacle. Battle of the Bulge, 1965. Yes, we already praised this one for nailing winter operations, but veterans also love pointing out where it crashed and burned. The infamous problem? The German Tiger tanks weren't Tigers at all. They were American M47 Pattons, painted gray, and any veteran or history buff could spot the difference from a mile away. Tanks don't just look sort of similar. To the men who lived in them, every line, hatch, and trackpad matters. Watching Pattons pretend to be Tigers was like watching a modern sports car trying to play a Model T. It just didn't work. Veterans said it pulled them right out of the story. The film also turned tank warfare into something close to a gladiator match. Long, drawn-out duels in open fields, like jousts, rather than the fast, chaotic, terrain-heavy maneuvers veterans actually remembered. Real armored combat is messy: mud, smoke, fog, and confusion. Battle of the Bulge simplified it into chess pieces sliding across snow. To be fair, the film still holds a nostalgic place in some veterans' hearts. But for accuracy, the Patton as Tiger problem is so glaring that it overshadows everything else. It's a prime example of how Hollywood's shortcuts can turn an otherwise solid war epic into a headshaker for the people who know better. Pearl Harbor, 2001. Michael Bay went big with Pearl Harbor. Big explosions, big romance, big budget. But when it came to tanks, veterans called foul. The film tosses in armored vehicles that simply didn't exist in 1941. Wrong models, wrong details, wrong time period. For those who actually know the hardware, it felt like nails on a chalkboard. Instead of focusing on accuracy, the movie uses tanks as background dressing, clanking across the screen without logic. Veterans spotted modern details slapped on machines that had no place in the attack sequence. One tank enthusiast joked, "It's like they raided a museum, borrowed whatever was shiny, and hoped nobody noticed." Spoiler: people noticed. The inaccuracies extended beyond the visuals. The way the tanks were operated, smooth, flawless, without maintenance issues, was pure fantasy. Real crews in the early 40 struggled with limited visibility, unreliable engines, and long startup times. Pearl Harbor shows tanks firing on cue, maneuvering like hot rods, and adding to the spectacle without a hint of realism. The irony is that the attack itself was meticulously recreated with ships and planes. But the tanks? They got treated like afterthoughts. Veterans shook their heads, muttering the same complaint. If you're going to spend millions on historical detail, why blow it on something as obvious as the wrong tank? Saving Private Ryan, 1998. One of the greatest war films ever made, except when it comes to tanks. Veterans love Spielberg's infantry realism, but they roll their eyes at the Tiger tank sequences. Why? Because those Tigers weren't Tigers at all. They were mocked-up T-34s dressed in German paint, and to anyone who served around armor, the disguise wasn't fooling anybody. The climactic battle hinges on the terrifying presence of German armor. But veterans watching the film said the tanks lacked the authentic menace of the real thing. The dimensions were off, the angles wrong, the movement unconvincing. One vet quipped, "That's not a Tiger, that's Halloween cosplay." It's not just the look. The film exaggerates the Tiger's invincibility, turning it into an unstoppable monster. Real Tigers were formidable, but they weren't supernatural. They broke down often, guzzled fuel, and had exploitable weak points. Spielberg's Tigers move like movie monsters. Slow, ominous, invulnerable until Hollywood decides otherwise. To be clear, Saving Private Ryan remains a masterpiece. Its infantry combat set a new bar for authenticity. But when it comes to the tanks, veterans didn't buy it. For them, the vehicles felt like stand-ins, props that lacked the weight and reality the rest of the movie so brilliantly captured. Red Tails, 2012. Red Tails set out to celebrate the Tuskegee Airmen, but when tanks show up, veterans cringed. The film nails some airborne sequences, but its armored moments are pure digital candy. Tanks roll like video game avatars, immune to terrain, physics, or the messy reality of mid-20th century machinery. The problem is simple: weight. Real tanks crush the ground, rattle, and roar with bone-shaking noise. Red Tails' tanks glide across battlefields like they're on roller skates. Shell impacts look more like fireworks than the brutal chaos of real steel on steel. Veterans said it looked like an arcade shooter, not the muddy, deafening ordeal they remembered. Tactically, the film isn't much better. The armored vehicles are treated as static targets for the pilots to swoop in and destroy, rather than showing their coordination with infantry or the constant maintenance headaches they created. To tank veterans, the lack of detail in how they moved, loaded, or operated made them feel like props dropped in to raise the stakes, not authentic machines. Red Tails may soar in the air, but on the ground, veterans said its tanks were grounded in fantasy. Kelly's Heroes, 1970. Yes, Kelly's Heroes also made the nailed it list, but veterans always bring up the ending standoff as a miss. After giving audiences some of the most authentic tank battles of the 70 seconds, the film wraps with a showdown straight out of a spaghetti western. The Sherman and the Tiger face off like gunfighters at high noon, and for veterans, it pushed things from gritty realism into parody. In real combat, no crew would idle in the open, staring down an enemy machine in some stylized duel. It made for cinematic tension, sure, but veterans said it killed the accuracy. Tanks don't trade stares. They maneuver, flank, and ambush. Sitting in the open is just begging for disaster. One veteran laughed that the sequence felt more like Eastwood's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly than any battlefield he'd ever seen. After so much effort spent on authentic maintenance scenes, armor models, and tactical detail, the ending pulled the rug out. Kelly's Heroes remains a fan favorite, but for tank veterans, that final standoff proved that even a film that mostly gets it right can slip into Hollywood showmanship when the credits are near. A Bridge Too Far, 1977. Epic in scope, stunning in scale, but not quite right for the tanks. Richard Attenborough's A Bridge Too Far recreated Operation Market Garden with massive casts and jaw-dropping set pieces. Veterans respected the ambition, but when it came to armored warfare, the movie missed the subtleties. The issue was tactics. Tanks are shown lumbering through Dutch streets and fields with little support, rolling into ambushes like sitting ducks. Real crews relied heavily on infantry to scout and shield them. Without that, tanks became easy targets. Veterans watching the film wondered why the armor kept getting isolated, something no trained commander would have allowed. The portrayal also simplifies how the British and American tanks actually struggled. Breakdowns, fuel shortages, and communication failures plagued Market Garden. The film hints at it but never fully embraces the messy reality. Instead, tanks look like chess pieces, sliding into cinematic defeat. One veteran said the movie felt more like parade armor with smoke than the real chaos of Market Garden. It's visually impressive, no doubt, but accuracy? The crews who lived it said A Bridge Too Far lost its footing when it came to tanks. 1941179. Leave it to Spielberg's comedy 1941 to turn tanks into cartoon props. The movie is a farcical take on wartime panic, and while it may get laughs, veterans said its treatment of tanks was laughably bad. Machines that normally take coordinated crews to operate are shown bumbling around like circus attractions, crashing through buildings, and rolling without any weight or logic. The problem is tone. Comedy works on exaggeration, but veterans pointed out that the way tanks were portrayed stripped them of all authenticity. No sense of the claustrophobic interior, the slow, grinding mechanics, or the vulnerability crews faced. Instead, they bounce around like oversized toys. Even as parody, veterans said the physics were insulting. Tracks never slip, engines never struggle, and the vehicles behave like rubber props. It's funny to some, sure, but for those who spent time inside real armored machines, it was a reminder of how quickly Hollywood can turn steel into slapstick. 1941 wasn't trying to be Saving Private Ryan, but veterans still shook their heads. For them, it was proof that once you cross the line into cartoon territory, tanks stop being believable and start being punchlines. Patton, 1970. Just like Kelly's Heroes, Patton is a film veterans both salute and criticize. The tactics, terrain, and strategy? Spot on. But the tanks themselves? Not so much. The American Shermans in the movie weren't Shermans at all. They were M48 Pattons, dressed up with cosmetic changes, and for anyone who'd served around armor, the difference was obvious. To the untrained eye, they might look fine, but veterans spotted the giveaways instantly. The distinctive gun mantlets, the track designs, the turret shapes. "That's not a Sherman," one tanker said. "That's an M48 wearing makeup. And once you see it, you can't unsee it." It wasn't just an aesthetic problem. Veterans pointed out that the way those Patton stand-ins moved and handled didn't match the real Shermans of World War II. The suspension bounce, the track width, even the way they clambered over terrain felt wrong. Patton remains a classic, no question. But for tank veterans, its armor problem is a cautionary tale. Authenticity isn't just about strategy, it's about the machines themselves. And when you swap them for the wrong ones, the audience you most want to impress will spot it in seconds. So there you have it, 12 films that got tanks right, and 10 that had veterans shaking their heads. From Fury's bone-rattling authenticity to Battlefield Earth's toy box fantasy, the gap between respect and ridicule is wide. But here's the real takeaway. Veterans don't demand perfection. They just want films to treat tanks like the temperamental, terrifying machines they were. Which side of the list surprised you most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe for more deep dive war film breakdowns.